Hello, my name's John Ennis, curator producer at Journeys in Design, and today we're continuing our sea voyage around Scotland, exploring sustainable art, design, and industry in the coastal communities around the country. There's a well-worn debate about the differences between art and design. I'm instinctively in favour of looking at the similarities and then celebrating the differences. There's the aesthetic. What does it look like, or sound like, or feel like? The process, what skills have gone into creating it, and what materials have been used, and the intent, and that's perhaps where the difference might be most. Art perhaps being more biographical and asking questions, design perhaps being more functional and offering solutions. In the end, for me and many, it's all art. That's why I'm delighted today to be joined on board and welcome artist and activist David Cass. David, how are you doing?
Hi there, very happy to be with you, thank you.
Good stuff. David's a man whose art offers, poses all those questions and offers, in terms of materiality, sustainability and ecological perspective, great appeal on many layered levels. So David, I'm in Edinburgh. You're not. And
I'm currently in London. I have been for around a year now.
Wonderful.
And Scotland's my base.
Right. And that wasn't where you started. You're a Scotsman.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
What's a little bit about that early journey of your own?
Brought up in the Scottish borders in the village of Stow.
And then
went to school nearby and then studied at Edinburgh College of Art, which is when my love for working with found objects and sustainable materials really began to take hold.
And in fact, it's where I first met you through your work, and I had a rifle through a fish through your portfolio. And
yep.
In fact, we have a piece here sitting next above George Wiley and next to Ian Hamilton Finlay, David Cass.
It's a great spot to be in.
Good. And tell us a little bit about this one.
Yeah, so that piece is called So Many Endings, and it's one of the first in a series of pieces which basically uses up all the leftovers created, all the offcuts created during the previous, let's say, year's worth of projects. I don't like to discard or throw away anything in the studio, so everything has a new life. And in the case of this piece behind you, which it's probably hard to make out exactly what it is from the screen, but it's a drawer, a wooden drawer. You're seeing it from the side view.
Yes.
And inside is a compressed stack of leftover pieces of wood.
Yes.
So,
and it's on a found.
Exactly. Yeah. So even the surface itself is a piece of found board card.
I think that appealed to me very much at the time. There's the drawing pin mark things are still.
Yeah.
I'm
not even sure what kind of board it was or where it was used, but it would have been something I pulled out of a skip, I think, because at the time I was salvaging materials quite literally from streets, from bins, from Sam Burns junk market in Preston Pans.
Stop now. Well, now that's very interesting because that sense of finding objects and using them in your art really has stayed as a persistent part of your process. So if you think about your journey from Edinburgh, I think we've spoken before, you went off to Italy and France and Spain. Perhaps you could take us a little journey through where you've been.
Exactly. So, well, it all started in Edinburgh, working with found materials, and a lot of it kind of by accident, the way I began using those materials, but it was always wooden pieces. Anyway, my degree show, which we met at, involved a series of paintings as well as drawings and sculptural pieces featuring images of sea upon bits of wood, old mirror backs, bits of card. As a result of the degree show, I was given a scholarship to Florence from the RSA. And in Florence, this kind of just reached a peak because I was going on a daily basis to the Sant'Ambrogio Antiques Market, which sadly no longer exists. But this became it for me, going out in the mornings and scavenging for materials and then spending my days painting. I was never buying particularly special bits and pieces to work on. I was trying to find everyday items like
Okay.
old boxes that you'd be familiar with, or an old coffee grinder, or matchboxes, things that we know what we're looking at, really, so that people can relate to them as well. When I present something in its finished state, you might say to yourself, oh, okay, that looks like it was once a shutter, or that's once been a farmhouse door, let's say. So I was finding all sorts of bits and bobs.
This is flea markets in Florence.
Exactly, yeah. So the scale escalated. I found myself with a van, and the Florence scholarship gradually morphed into travels around Europe in a van,
Wonderful.
doing residencies, having exhibitions, finding materials, and painting, all at the same time, all as I went. So the antique shops and racontes of Paris, the flea markets of Brussels, and then a year spent circling Spain, which
That
also
would be your
involved
most. Would that be your almost
exactly, yeah, most
extended?
recent extended travels. I try not to go on short trips. I try and combine multiple purposes on one trip. So
And
Spain was a combination of everything.
and we had a very interesting conversation about the regions in Spain that you found yourself in. And even actually, as we're speaking now, the iterative process that you've been involved in, taking this notion of recycling and sustainability, it's evolving in your mind and in your work.
Yeah,
Engaging, I think it's fair to say, in issues of ecology and climate change. So you're in.
definitely.
Tell us a little bit about the region in Spain that you found yourself.
I found myself in Almeria, in the semi-desert, in the arid zone. And I spent a good 6 months there. And so, as you said, I had been focusing on sustainability. And up until that residency in Spain, I hadn't been combining this with any kind of discussion other than maybe my own personal circumstances. But whilst being there in Spain, I realized what life was like in an arid zone in this location, which is Europe's first proper victim of desertification. And I
Well, look,
decided,
I mean, that's that. Until we were speaking, I had no idea that was the
yeah,
case.
yeah,
Europe
it's
has this
round about the
desert.
Cabo de Gata, yeah, behind Almeria. We have a semi-desert in Europe, and so I began to combine this topic with the use of found materials. So combining my love for flea marketing and salvaging things, and painting landscape or seascape scenes with a discussion around our changing earth. So I took this extreme environment and began to distill it into artworks whilst in Spain. And that exploration of environmental extremes quickly took me to Venice.
Well, just that's extraordinary contrast. There you are, deep
Exactly,
in the
contrast, yeah.
wilderness, if you like, and then you find yourself within one of Europe's most significant and extraordinary cultural hubs, a medieval city-state that survives now largely through its contribution to the art and architecture world.
Yeah,
What a contrast.
absolutely. I mean, that my work is always kind of about contrasts, whether that's the use of dry watercolor paint onto a dry surface, exploring an image of sea. Contrasts are everywhere, but this one mostly because I had gone from working somewhere that was extremely dry and arid to somewhere, Venice, Europe's first clear victim of rising sea levels, somewhere that's flooding more and more often. So I tried to combine the use of found objects and sustainable materials with a discussion about environmental extremes. So looking into flooding in Venice and also flooding in Florence, because Florence too has suffered flooding of the River Arno. And that set against images of desertification in Spain. So
Quite a remarkable journey, and actually one, when we've spoken before and today, quite an emotional journey. And I feel the passion of the ecological debate come through in what you're saying, but also, of course, in your work. And for me, looking in, I see an artist and an art activist. And that implies how the message is presented, and I guess the collaborative process as well. That means
absolutely, collaboration is key when discussing this kind of topic. And I mean, you'll have heard me just there speaking. I have a tendency to waffle a little bit, and maybe
not at all.
it's tricky sometimes for artists to clearly articulate what it is they're trying to discuss. And so if you hear me talking about working in extreme environments and trying to contrast materials with subject matter, it can all get a bit confusing. So you have to sometimes reach out and ask for an objective opinion. So what I did was I reached out to an oceanographer in the States, John Englander, and to a climate scientist from Edinburgh, Professor Dave Ray. And they were very kind. They answered all my questions, and they helped me distill down what I was trying to explore in my work so that people can access it more easily. Because I think, like you say, collaboration is key, and it's all about entry points and getting our public involved. So I do feel like I've been given a platform as an artist, and so I do want to give something back. And if it's something I care about, all the more so. So with the help of these two individuals, I've been able to produce bodies of work which offer simplified entry points. Not simplified, digestible entry points.
I think this is so fascinating for me, looking at the progression of your work, in the sense of, you mentioned a coffee pot, a flea pot find in a coffee grinder, a flea pot.
Exactly, yeah.
And I can see behind you a very engaging piece. I should mention, maybe we should give a shout out to the Scottish Gallery, who represent you in Edinburgh and have done wonderful work. I was lucky enough to offer you space in Gayfield Creative Spaces in our Journeys in Design previous incarnation in 2016.
Exactly, yeah.
But you had a very successful and very engaging exhibition in the Scottish Gallery in 2019, last year. And what I love you're saying is that this notion of the threshold, that how we meet work and how it's affected by the medium. And look, we've got behind your shoulder there.
Yeah, the lighting isn't great. What you're seeing behind you there is a painted copper boiler. Again, a very everyday object. This has been in a tenement flat in Edinburgh, so it's a bit shallower than a normal boiler might be. The reason for painting on a boiler is because 42% of the reason behind sea rise comes from thermal expansion. So as much as it's to do with the melting of ice in the Arctic and Antarctica too, it's also about the fact that water is warming. So I thought to myself, okay, what's the best way to explore the topic of thermal expansion in an artwork? And it just seemed right to find a boiler. So I sourced this one from Edinburgh Architectural Salvage Yard, and I have simply painted the sea on it. And as a further, maybe too literal twist, I have painted the horizon line at a level of 42%. Again, that's just so it can become a talking point, and people might say, okay, it's called 42%. Why? Why does the horizon rest here, and why the boiler? It's just so we can open a discussion like this.
Well, I think it's incredibly effective. You say just painted on the sea. I have to say the painterly mastery of those seascapes, it's just, they are absolutely extraordinary when one sees them. And, you know, I'd recommend anyone have a peek in at your website, which is, of course, always going to be restricted in how it can offer any artwork to the viewer. But there's nothing quite like seeing these pieces in real life. And congratulations on that exhibition in the Scottish Gallery. That was called Rising Horizon.
Correct, yep.
And you've been very generous in talking about the importance of collaboration and that notion of stepping out and looking at the process and the work with others who are not necessarily artists. And then, of course, in working with the very talented team at the Scottish Gallery. At the start of this year, the show exhibition moved to North Uist, and I've been very lucky to have a chance to speak with Andy McKinnon and Simon Hart, his new colleague there at Tai Korsava. And I have to thank you, David, for helping with the Gaelic pronunciation.
It took me a while too.
Okay, well, we're both on that one. But just at the start of this year, and the title and the exhibition morphed.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah, we flipped it round basically. This is thanks to Andy.
It became Horizon Rising.
Exactly, yeah. I wanted to make the same exhibition from Edinburgh and move it to North Uist, but to also nod towards the location. So I researched North Uist. I found out about the fact it's a low-lying island. I found out about the fact that it's also suffering with high tides, just as Venice is. And so I wanted to add some paintings to the series. And so I made a new set of works which looked down, which looked at the water. Kind of me saying the water is now at our feet. It's become an issue that needs discussed right now. Of course, it is being discussed by artists worldwide, by everybody. But in my own small way. Yeah, so Andy and I curated the show in a slightly different way. Andy hung it himself beautifully and arranged the works in the order of the horizon line, so that as you circled the gallery space, the horizon got gradually
So that's different than the...
whereas in the Scottish gallery, there were more works because it was a larger space. We had the horizons kind of as this cluster would be behind the boiler, scattered around. I do like that method of hanging where pieces aren't quite on a single line. So it was just a case of tweaking the project in order for it to better suit the North US location.
And then the threshold, the point at which you meet it becomes different, and the experiences and that notion of the rising horizon, very pertinent, as you say, to I mean,
it's down to all of us. If we do not live in a sustainable way, and that's why I've used these recycled materials, i.e. sustainable materials, if we don't, then the horizon quite literally will rise. It's down to us at this point. So I have stripped back the works as much as possible in order to convey this message.
Absolutely. Can I take you then, because that leads me to thinking about this notion of paring back. The experience of lockdown and the experience of designing our re-emergence from that, but the lockdown period itself, you speak with passion and with emotionality about the work you have. For me, in speaking with artists and other curators and designers and in industry as well, everyone's experience of lockdown has been obviously unique, but there have been some things, the notion of pace and change of pace and of prioritizing and reprioritizing. And I guess also when your engagement is with making and process and doing, that will have an effect as well. Can you
absolutely
a little bit of a flavour of how lockdown has been for you?
Well, as we've been discussing, my work is exploring pretty heavy topics.
Yes.
And there was a period last year, start of this year, when I was researching every day. And the fact is, the more you read about, the more you research what's going on to what's happening with our Earth at the moment, it does get to you. So when lockdown hit, and we're in central London here, so we really couldn't go out at all, not even for exercise, I had to step away from that level of research because it was affecting my mental health.
Sure.
So I stepped back and I began to focus quite heavily on process, on finding a way to just focus on making the paintings without letting the research and the topic of many of the works filter into the making process. So my art has been a kind of grounding process over the course of lockdown. And I think many artist friends I've spoken to have felt the same way. They've used their art as a kind of escape during a period which has been difficult for all of us. And maybe in my own way also, if I can give back some optimistic pieces, if I can share something out there that people can relate to, that might offer a moment of relief, that's good too. It doesn't mean I've forgotten any of the environmental topics that I'd previously been wholeheartedly focusing on. Just means that I've shifted the focus slightly. And bizarrely, I've changed materials too. I've moved away from working on metal to working on wood, as I had been for the last 5 years or so. And I can't explain exactly why that is. Maybe just the texture, the grain of wood is more warming.
Hi, fascinating. And in that sense, it's been in contrast to lots of the traveling that have been inherent in your in your work. You're in one place for some time. That's almost comforting.
Personally, I hate upheaval, and as much as I like being in a new location, I don't like the process of journeying. I do find it quite stressful. I think I work best when I'm in a place where I'm happy and comfortable and secure, so I can then just make sure everything's in place and I can work. Well, so too, the fact that we've all had this period of lockdown means that we can just focus.
I mean, looking at your work, there isn't discomfort, there's message, but there doesn't appear to be discomfort. So that doesn't, the traumas of travel don't easily make themselves obvious in your work. But you're thinking about traveling again. There, when I spoke with you before, and indeed with Andy since, this extraordinary potential relationship between North Uist, and I know that's something you're exploring without giving.
Yeah, it's not a connection one would naturally think
No.
of, but if you think about it, they're both islands. They're both relatively small. They're both low-lying, and they're both suffering from sea level rise, in the sense that they're both experiencing frequent aqua alta, as it's called in Venice, high water. And it's affecting even the gallery, as you'll have spoken with Andy about. The gallery
Indeed.
itself can't extend beyond its current boundary because of its location by the water.
And we've just had news of what essentially is a sticking plaster, some sort of barrage around Venice to try and...
Yeah, the Mose system, the hydraulic dam.
But if
yes,
anything,
sure, it'll work, but
yeah.
I mean, it'll work in the sense that it will stop the worst of the high waters entering the city.
But surely it must be a marker of the trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. Just because this dam has been installed and just because it functions doesn't mean that any progress has been made. It just means a plaster has been applied to that part of Italy. So it doesn't mean that the rest of Italy's coast is any safer.
So we're looking forward, though, to a further exploration, and it's a collaboration between yourself and Andy, in fact, at Thai Cursova.
Exactly. So in 2022, I'll show during the Venice Biennale, and it'll be a couple of artworks which I don't want to reveal too much yet, but one of them is a collaboration with Andy and with Thai Cursova and his film production company there.
Yes.
And it will be a filmed project, so we're going to construct a kind of imaginary porthole between Venice and North Uist. So some film made by me will be shown in North Uist, and at the same time some film made by Andy of the waters around North Uist will be projected in Venice. So a kind of discussion across many miles.
Well, look, what a wonderful project to look forward to and to keep an eye on. David, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking today. We're going from so many endings, as you have bookmarked your work, to some fascinating new beginnings and challenges ahead. So congratulations on your work and your collaborations, and thank you so much for speaking to us today as well.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
All the very best.